We all know of the opening of the Forth Rail Bridge in 1890, but how many know that on the same day the Glenfarg line also opened? This line had involved various earthworks and the construction of 2 viaducts. Plus 2 tunnels of some 500 yards long each. As well as Glenfarg Station sitting at the summit of the route. By making use of and upgrading existing lines through Kinross and adding the Glenfarg section between Mawcarst and Bridge of Erne junctions, as indicated on the right-hand map, a double track was engineered to accommodate express trains and provided the shortest route from Edinburgh to Perth. The same journey now requires a circuitous loop via Stirling or Ladybank. Although the station shut and the line closed to passengers in 1964, the railway survived the beaching cuts but finally closed in 1970. Let's explore more, including the tunnels and the reason for the line's eventual closure.
In 1890, perhaps Scotland's greatest piece of infrastructure was completed, the Forth Railway Bridge. Now, it would be pointless to build a bridge like that without it having somewhere to go. So in order to link Edinburgh with Perth more directly, the Glenfarg Railway was built, which is a short line that linked the Mawcarst Junction to the Bridge of Erne. But this short line required some substantial engineering projects to bring it to fruition. These included 2 viaducts and 2 tunnels, both of which I'm going to show you in this video. This is the Glenfarg Viaduct, which is mostly constructed out of masonry with brick on the underside of the arches, and it's 4 arches in length passing over the B996 and the River Farg. Now the B996 used to be the main road between Edinburgh and Perth, and believe it or not, it's integral to the story of this railway. I'm standing on top of the viaduct, which recently saw some renovation works taking place in March of 2014. So beforehand this used to be covered in vegetation, and now it's nice and clear, giving you a great look at the southern portal of Glenfarg South Tunnel. Now the first thing that strikes you when you enter the tunnel is just how big and cavernous a space it is. You think tunnels are being narrow, awkward wee things, but this place, as you can see, is huge. It has a nice echo to it, you get some nice acoustics down here. And the southern tunnel is slightly longer than the northern tunnel. The southern tunnel is 517 yards in length, the northern tunnel is 507 yards in length. So they're basically pretty much the same. But they both provide slightly different experiences. Now the south tunnel is straight for the first 350 yards and it curves ever so slightly at the end. I can see, looking into the distance, a slight bit of light coming in from around the bend, but I doubt the camera will be picking that up. Now the car in the foreground here, I forget exactly what it is because I'm no good with cars, especially when they're in a state like this, but there used to be 2 cars down here. One was removed at some point in 2012, and this one has been pretty much destroyed almost completely. Now I do have photos of it looking a lot more car-shaped and less like a big pile of scrap metal, which is a real shame because this has always been a very iconic feature of Glenfarg South. It's the first thing you see when you walk in, and it always kind of defines the view, defines where people take their photographs from, because if you have this as foreground interest, it really brings the rest of the tunnel to life. These large square holes in the side of the lining were cut shortly after the tunnel opened so they could inspect the depth of the concrete used to line the tunnel. Now if you look right to the back, that is how deep the concrete lining is, or how thick it is around the entire circumference of the bore. And believe it or not, concrete was quite new at the time. These tunnels were pioneers. They were some of the first to use a concrete lining, and as such it was an unknown quantity, but it was deemed infinitely better than brick. Now, the tunnel is provided with regular refuges. These are spaced every couple of yards in each direction. And if you were working in the tunnel and a train was passing through, this is where you would go to hide to stop yourself from being run over. Now this one seems to be in quite poor condition. The concrete around the edge has crumbled a bit, revealing some of the brickwork that leads to the original lining at the back there. And there also seems to be this red hue to the concrete at this point, or this kind of pinkish salmony colour. And I believe this was probably caused by people having fires down here, or something similar to that. But it just creates some, you'd think concrete is just being boring, grey, not very interesting, but you get some really nice colours off it if you know where to look. Now you might be able to hear dripping sounds all around me. Glenfarg South isn't a particularly wet tunnel. There's some that are far worse than this, but the concrete lining makes it very difficult for the water to escape from behind the initial bore, and as such weep holes have been inserted right through to allow water to gradually escape and drip down, which is what you can hear at this point. Now we're about halfway through the tunnel, and at this point you get a really good impression of how the concrete lining went on. You can see all the connections between the different sections of it. And if you look right at the top here, I will guide the camera up and zoom in. You can see what almost looks like a zip line right along the top of the tunnel, where the concrete lining sort of joins along the crown. These are a new addition to the tunnel. I've not seen these logs down here before, which shows that it's still used for storage and various other things, so these tunnels at least still have some life in them after the closure of the line. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The last 150 yards of Glenfarg South have a slight curve to them, which means that when you're walking through, initially you can't see the end, but you always get a wee bit of a glow, and when you get to this point you can actually see some light beginning to infiltrate around the bend. This is the northern portal of the southern tunnel, or Glenfarg South tunnel, and as soon as you leave you enter this really drippy, boggy, muddy part of the cutting, but it only extends just to the other side of the bridge over the track you can see there. Now that bridge just carries a farm track. I first visited the Glenfarg tunnels in 2009, and what I'd done is I'd seen them marked on the map, so they're pretty much Scotland's worst kept secrets. And I thought, tunnels, that might be interesting, take a walk down, see what happens. I was just expecting them to be blocked off, you wouldn't be able to get in. And when I got here, I was very shocked. You can walk right in and go all the way through to the other side, and that has started off what has perhaps been the best chapter of my life, exploring disused railway tunnels, viaducts and everything else related to the underground. And it's just been a great experience over the last few years, getting to see all sorts of interesting places, both all through Scotland and a wee bit into England as well. And this tunnel started it all. This tunnel is what inspired me to continue seeing other tunnels and just generally appreciating the left behind infrastructure of old railways. It's not just the tunnels that make this line great. We not only have this massive bridge carrying a farm track over it, but as you can see on the right hand side of the frame there is a waterfall. Now that stream is carried underneath the railway via a culvert, which is brick lined and quite nicely done. There's about half a mile between the two tunnels. Glenfarg South is in the distance in that direction, and behind me is Glenfarg North, which we'll get to in just a second. But at the moment we're standing on top of quite a tall ridge. If I pan across this way and down a wee bit, you can see the road through the trees, as well as part of the Glenfarg River. It always seems strange that after walking sort of downhill and through tunnels that you end up above the road. It always strikes me as not being odd, it's just one of those strange occurrences. Now the line itself climbs at a steady 1 in 74 from the bridge of Erne to the summit of the railway at Glenfarg. There it is, the portal to Glenfarg North tunnel. Now as you can see, the track approaching is ever so slightly curved, and it retains this curve right the way through the 507 yard long bore. When I first came to the Glenfarg tunnels in 2009, I came completely unprepared. My friend and I arrived, and not one of us had a torch. And now Glenfarg North is completely curved, so when you get into the middle, it is pitch black. We didn't know this, but somehow we managed to muddle through and we got to the other side without one. But I definitely recommend bringing one, because if you don't, you miss out on all the great things that you can see on the inside. Let's take a look. Now when you first step in to Glenfarg North, the first thing you can see is the fact that it curves constantly. But the trained eye will notice that the lining of the tunnel is masonry at the bottom, brick around there, and then the concrete starts just there, so you get this real mishmash of various different linings that don't all quite fit together. So that's what makes this tunnel interesting and slightly more diverse from Glenfarg South. Now I believe this was the first of the two tunnels to be built purely because of this peculiar use of varying different materials. Now the tunnels were built by William Galbraith, whose signature material was concrete, and these tunnels were pioneering at the time for their use of concrete. But I get the feeling that maybe he wasn't quite willing to go all the way with this one, hence why you get these sections of brick and stone around the portals. One of the more interesting things you can find in Glenfarg North is this old Halloween skeleton, which has been hanging off this cable hook for years now. And if we shine the torch on it a wee bit, I'm going to turn it off in a second. Let's see if it glows in the dark. Now I've only walked a short way into the tunnel, and already you can see it's getting very dark in here. You can just about see some light coming off from around the bend there, but otherwise we're now in complete darkness if I was to turn off the torch. So imagine trying to walk through here without one, like we did the very first time we came here. Like I say, somehow we managed it, but there is this annoying trench down the side that keeps catching you out if you do try and do this one in the dark. Now when you get to the halfway point of Glenfarg North, if I guide the torch just there, you can see the brick lining section actually comes to an end, and we end up the middle bit is entirely concrete lined as it is in Glenfarg South. Now at this point you can just about see light from both portals. If I then come round again, you can see light infiltrating from that side as well. So once your eyes adjust, it's actually not too bad in here in terms of seeing where you're going, although it is, without the torch, almost pitch black. As you emerge from the midsection of Glenfarg North, you can see some light coming in from the end. If I take away the torch completely, you can see that wee bit of light in the middle. You can see that the brick lining comes back in again. This tunnel has a very nice symmetry to it in terms of its transition stages. So when we get to the other end, prepare to see a bit more stone, brick and concrete all in the same place. I'm at the northern end of the North Tunnel now, and as you can see we've got concrete there, masonry there, going into brick around the top. Now at the northern end of the North Tunnel there used to be this great piece of old farming equipment, but it looks like, as with the car at the southern end of the Southern Tunnel, it has been destroyed for no reason, and only sort of bits and pieces of it remain, which is a real shame. That is the northern portal of Glenfarg North. Like I say, this tunnel has a great symmetry to it within its curvature and its lining and what you can see on the inside. And I'm not sure which out of the two I prefer. They both provide very different experiences. They're very unique, and it's just in general a really great walk to look at. But it's not over yet. After visiting the tunnels, I would recommend carrying on just a wee bit, because there is one final treat this railway line gives you, and this is the Potty Hill or Kilknocky Viaduct. I'm not sure which name is correct. They both appear on the map. They both seem reasonably accurate to me. And it's slightly longer than the Glenfarg Viaduct, but it's completely surrounded by trees, so I've never been able to get any decent photographs of it or really show it off in the best light. So when I first came here, you just see these walls by the side. You don't even realise you're going across a viaduct until you look over the side. This is the view you get from the top of the viaduct. Below there is a stream, but mostly what you can see are just trees, which is what you can see from the bottom as well. I couldn't finish this video without showing you the Potty Hill Viaduct, which is slightly longer than the Glenfarg Viaduct, but it crosses this woodland area, so you can't quite see it properly. But this is about the best view you get of its brilliant arches as it traverses this small gorge. Now on a clear day you can see the M90 from this point. Now you might be wondering what the M90 has to do with the Glenfarg Railway. Well, the railway itself opened in 1890 to provide a direct connection between Edinburgh and Perth via the new Forth Rail Bridge. The line itself managed to avoid the beaching cuts, but unfortunately it was sacrificed in 1970 to make room for the M90 completion. Now, the last part of the M90 to be built was between Junction 8 and Junction 9, between Morecast and the Bridge of Erne, which was the length of the Glenfarg Railway, and unfortunately that meant it had to be closed as the two couldn't sit side by side. The M90 had to borrow parts of the Glenfarg Railway's track bed, both at Glenfarg Village and on the Balmano hill climb coming out of the Bridge of Erne. So that meant that the line itself closed in 1970, and 7 years later parts of its track bed were obliterated by the M90. So that was the Glenfarg Railway, one of the most interesting railways in Scotland. Across a mile and a half you pass over 2 viaducts and through 2 tunnels. Both tunnels have very different characteristics and both worthy of videos in their own right, but because there's so much wealth in one area, it's worth just looking at everything at once and getting a real picture for how the railway has managed to take on this slightly challenging and difficult terrain to drive a line between Edinburgh and Perth. These tunnels definitely deserve a thumbs up.